I'm currently on loan from LA Family Housing, which is the largest affordable housing developer and homeless service provider in the San Fernando Valley, based in North Hollywood. So I'm on loan from LA Family Housing, where we have many SC MSW students. I don't know if any of you are in the room, but we have a good crop of you guys right now, and we so appreciate everything that you help us do. But I'm on loan to the campaign because my background is in politics and campaigns. My last job before this one was a campaign manager on an LA City Council race. I have a law degree, but always intended to use it on the politics and policy side. And so this is really a great opportunity to put some of those skills that I've developed in sort of raw campaign management and execution to work for a cause that I really believe in, and a cause that my employer believes in enough to put me on loan to another organization for 3 months. And so it's been a lot of fun, and this has been a great campaign, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about what we've learned and what we've seen through the numbers on this campaign, because I think a lot of it will be really inspiring and enlightening for everybody here.
Hi everyone, so I'm Dora Gallo. I'm the CEO for Community of Friends, and we're a nonprofit organization that develops permanent supportive housing in LA County, primarily, although we have a fair number of projects in Orange County and we're expanding into the Inland Empire. There's some literature in the back of the room that describes the work that we do and the range of projects and location. We were formed very interestingly with seed funding from the LA County Department of Mental Health back in 1988. They had been working with people with mental illness in the streets and realized that after initial connection, they couldn't find them again, and became fully cognizant of the homeless problem that was burgeoning in Los Angeles back in the late 80s. They provided some resources to someone that we consider our founder, Tanya Tull, who's very engaged in the housing and social services world. And she created our organization, and our name is not faith-based. There are a lot of people who think that we're related to the Quakers. But a Community of Friends is actually an organization with a name that's striving to create, for those who have been disenfranchised in the community, a community where they can feel like they're among friends, and that's how our name came about. I've been with the organization for 13 years and have seen the organization grow quite a bit. We started off with a 9-unit building, and we now developed buildings. Our biggest one so far is 108 units that we're working out in Riverside, but we have right now 40 buildings in our portfolio. Our organization also have spun off other organizations that do our work. We created and founded an organization in San Diego County to do exactly what we do. We paid it forward, so we started the organization just like Tanya Tull did for us, and we got the first few projects. And so we have some projects in San Diego through an organization that we founded and no longer have an affiliation with. With the 40 buildings, I think it was mentioned, we have about 2,000 people living in our buildings, including about 600 kids. When we first started, we worked with adults only. But in the late 1990s, we started building for families. And so now we run the gamut. We serve families, individuals who serve transition-age youth, veterans, people with developmental disabilities. We've just become known as a provider that cares for people who have special needs.
Hi, I'm Seth Kurzban. As mentioned, I'm at the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work. And I am primarily working on developing and testing interventions that focus on ways to improve community and social integration for individuals who are dealing with serious persistent mental illness and are chronically at risk for incarceration, substance use, and homelessness. So I've, throughout LA, mainly with DMH, but also with some contracted clinics, been trying to focus on how can we better improve individuals' abilities to reintegrate into social environments as they leave homelessness or jail, and as they're dealing with a serious mental illness.
Mike Alvidrez, I'm the CEO at Skid Row Housing Trust. We were founded in 1989 for the specific purpose of preserving as much of the remaining stock of single-room occupancy hotels, many of which were concentrated in the downtown area, in and around Skid Row. And so way back when, our focus was on preservation and affordability. We would buy buildings, fix them up, make them decent, and then rent them out to people who were extremely low income. over time, we've shifted our focus, and we serve single adults only. We've shifted our focus to one that is much more oriented to supportive housing, recognizing that without services, folks don't stabilize at a high enough rate, and we don't really address their underlying causes of their homelessness unless we're bringing support services to do just that. In the early 2000s, we've moved from that to a what's called Housing First model, which does not require sobriety or having a mental illness under control as a precondition of tenancy. And we do this with partners from that range from behavioral health providers to medical providers to School of Social Work, School of Occupational Therapy, County Department of Health Services. So we have 1,800 apartments in about 25 or 26 buildings. We're building more, and what obviously ties us into Prop Triple H is the fact that Skid Row has sort of been the epicenter of homelessness for decades. One part of that solution is obviously more housing of a particular type. And so in the absence of the dollars that used to come from the CRA and reductions in federal home dollars, which also go to bricks and mortar, having significantly been reduced in the last couple of years, Prop Triple H provides the opportunity for, excuse me, I hope I didn't ruin the recording. People like all of our organizations to actually build housing at a much faster rate. It has been about 300 units per year in the entire city, which is not adequate. And so I think Prop Triple H gives us the opportunity to significantly ramp that up 3 times the amount and hopefully reduce street homelessness significantly on a go-forward basis over the next 10 years.
Thank you. You already partially addressed the next question, but maybe Professor Seth Kyrba could discuss the current state of homelessness in Los Angeles and the major challenges facing the city as it addresses homelessness.
Homelessness in LA continues to grow. I was at a meeting yesterday where they were sharing a recent survey done in primarily Skid Row in the North Hollywood area, two areas. So one of the interesting things about LA is we do have different pockets of homelessness with different characteristics. Skid Row tends to be slightly more older, single, but homelessness in LA continues to grow. The number of homeless veterans in LA is now 1 out of every 4 homeless individuals is a veteran, despite significant efforts to try to reduce veteran homelessness in particular. The number of African American, in particular African American women with kids, continues to rise. So I think we have a lot of challenges that have existed for years in helping house homeless individuals, but now we have some new challenges as well, as I think the number of families and children continue to rise. So homelessness is sort of the tail end of that spectrum of housing insecurity, of just not having enough money for most of our most vulnerable at-risk population to stay housed even when they want to. You know, Proposition HHH is a great way to address building for those who already are homeless, but the continuing wave of homelessness won't dissipate if we don't also address the gaps in income and the lack of affordable housing in Los Angeles.
I would add to that is homelessness is the end result of some condition, but the conditions are different. And part of the challenge of solving for homelessness is that there are different reasons why people are homeless. You know, one is related to the people that all of us serve, to a large part, people who have disabilities of some sort, mental health, substance abuse addiction. But the other, there's a whole cadre of folks who are homeless for economic reasons, you know, and economic because of job losses or medical conditions. And so all these other systems that impact what can impact somebody when they're housing insecure. So, you know, I agree that homelessness is is really the result of housing insecurity. But at the same time, there's different reasons why people are housing insecure. It could be wage related. It could be the costs of housing. And so not only is it a supply issue, which is why Prop HHH is going to be helpful, but it's also an income issue as well, which is why JJJ is important.
Can I add one thing that I think there is a particular and perhaps unique problem that Los Angeles has, and that is historically it's been a low density, very spread out city. What is it, 459 square miles? It has not had a robust public transportation system. It has not had a city center in the way you think of other cities. People are employed all over the place. We traverse by freeway in our cars. And so it leads to, and I think it's safe to say we also have political fragmentation in the city and the county. I think all of those things lead to a fragmented perception. So I think a statistic, this is probably pretty dated by now, but 13% of the residents that lived in Los Angeles ever came to downtown. Has not until recently been a huge employment center. Government workers, and then everybody would go home. And so without that shared purpose that many other cities with a concentrated city core and robust public transportation have, the identification of an individual citizen who lives in San Diego doesn't have much in, not San Diego, San Pedro, doesn't have much in common with somebody out in the end of the San Fernando Valley. They both are living in Los Angeles, but they're sort of worlds apart. And so I think that's led to a breakdown in a shared interest to end homelessness. It existed in pockets here and there, and most people never experienced homelessness. You didn't run into them in the subway because we didn't have a subway. And you didn't run into them for the most part on the sidewalk because we all drive to work. And so I think that's allowed homelessness to persist at the significantly high level for a very long time. And I'm glad to see we're finally moving the needle from a public policy perspective, both at the city and the county, to actually begin to address this in an integrated way. But I do think just the way Los Angeles has evolved spatially has led to homelessness as an out of sight, out of mind kind of perception. So.
And just to pick up on that theme, I think the reason why HHH exists right now is because we have maxed out our existing systems and homelessness is felt in every corner of the city. So you have the Pacific Palisades raising $300,000 to enter into a contract with a service provider to do direct outreach in the Palisades. Now we're not talking about thousands or even really hundreds of people in the Palisades, but still enough motivation for a community to raise money on the far west side, removed a long ways from from downtown. San Pedro has been having town halls with their council member, and 500 people have been showing up. The West Valley had a town hall a month ago. 250 people showed up, and they were turning people away. So it's felt in every corner of the city because we've maxed out the existing structure, and so that created the political will, I think, for HHH to exist. Otherwise, we could have continued on with the status quo. Part of that also, we've been doing polling for the last 6 months on this. Homelessness is like up there with traffic and crime right now in terms of voters' priorities, which is unheard of. Right. Let's be clear. In the city of LA,
it's
like
just us ranting,
right?
So.
Like these guys have been doing this for a real long time and talking to each other, and none of you would be in this room, and there'd be no free pizza, and like this wouldn't be happening. But we have hit critical mass. We have maxed out our existing structures. We've stopped investing in it for a while, and that brought us to this moment. But people care in a way that they never have before because they're feeling it and seeing it for the reasons that Mike describes.
Thank you. So I guess sort of on that note, I want to talk a little bit about financing. So I wonder if the panelists can weigh in on how permanent supportive housing is currently financed and how Prop H's property tax revenues would be distributed and utilized to address permanent supportive housing.
How much time do you have about financing for supportive housing? Supportive housing is unique because Mike and I, we're both developers, and when you talk about development, you look just across the street and what's happening in and around the USC area. But we build just like a for-profit development entity does, but on the residential market. But what's unique about the work that we do is that we're serving people with very low incomes. We have to provide services in the building just to make sure that the people who are actually living there get the resources they need to live stable, independent lives. So not only do we need the traditional construction funding and the permanent financing, we also need the services funding, and we need the rental subsidies to make the project pencil from an operational standpoint, because our tenants won't have the capacity to pay rent like everybody in the open market. So the financing is really complicated. And I think we would venture to say that our staff, we can pit them up against the best for-profit developer out there, because our staff understands the financing structure so much more and the complications related to any other type of development. So, we deal with banks, we deal with investors, and then we have to make sure we have the rental subsidies, and they're all on a competition base. Everything that we do, for the most part, we have to compete for. It's not a handout to any of the nonprofit developers. And all of these different funding sources have different cycles. So like this one might be twice a year, this is once a year, this is every other year, and we have to figure out how to get it together. And so that's one reason you'll hear sometimes, it takes so long. Well, yeah, because we have to deal with this Byzantine financing structure. But most of us right now are using a federal program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. That provides the best leverage. And that provides maybe 60% of the resources to build the building. We still need to cobble other sources, state, federal, and local resources on the construction side. And then again, we have to put together the rental subsidies and the services. And all those three different sources, the three buckets, I would say, they won't let us start construction until we have everything all the ducks in a row. They don't want us to build it if they don't think we can provide services to our tenants. They won't let us build it if they don't think we can maintain it from an operational standpoint. So it's a little complicated. And even on the construction side, I mentioned tax credits about 60%. Nobody wants to fund it 100%. They all want us to, everybody needs to have a little bit of money in the game so that they know that everyone has a stake in it. And so usually on a project, there's anywhere, if you're lucky, from 4 sources to like 10 sources. So that's kind of how the financing works. And Prop HHH is intended to be one of those sources, but a significant source. And I don't know if either one of you want to comment on that itself.
Well, I'll just agree with what Dora said. It's extremely complicated. There's 3 phases to development. You've got to borrow and put your organization at risk, borrow acquisition pre-development financing to go out and do the due diligence on a particular site, lining up the construction financing and the permanent financing at the same time. And it can get pretty hairy, particularly when we just went through recently the recession, which had an impact at the federal level with sequestration. And so we thought we had a rental subsidy of this much, and whoops, now it's less than that. So it's harder than it should be. Every one of the funding sources has their own set of compliance rules that you have to follow and use their form, even though they're often asking you for the same information that the other guys did on a different form. So there's a lot of, it's pretty heavily regulated, and therefore there's a lot of compliance work. So you've got to hire people just to do that paperwork to prove that you're serving the people that you said you were going to, whether you're applying for rental subsidies or capital dollars or services dollars. So it's harder than it should be. And so maybe one of you guys, or maybe your MRED colleagues, could figure out a simpler system down the road so that we could actually do this faster and not have to spend a year or 2 years putting financing together, particularly given the high need that we have today and we'll probably have for some time to come.
2 things that I would add to that, 3 actually, Dora pointed out. This is a $1 billion measure. So this would be $1 billion, but as you just heard, this is maybe a third of the cost of a project, right? So you could also say this is a $3 billion measure because every one of those dollars isn't going to be made available until you identify additional dollars to support them. So that's important. The revenues come from people's property taxes. So it's an assessment that we put on the property tax bills of people who own real property, residential or commercial. They're not legally allowed to pass it on to renters. Although there are ways around that. Hopefully they won't do it. And so that's kind of that structure. Take a step back though, why do we need to be building this? We have a 3.2% vacancy rate in the city of Los Angeles. There's not a lot of units out there, right? We operate, LA Family Housing, my other employer, operates a bridge housing facility, which is oftentimes your first step off of the streets, indoors, start to kind of get your paperwork together and figure out a housing plan and figure out where the right place is. We have 160 people who hold vouchers for housing in that bridge housing building 230 people total, who can't find anywhere to take them. Just not an option. So why do we need to build this housing? Because we don't have it elsewhere. It doesn't exist. So I think those are two key points on A, micro, and B, macro.
All right, thank you.
I can't remember.
And this kind of addresses some of that need. Given that homelessness is a multifaceted issue, what are your top priorities, and especially that since there's such a high demand for the housing? Is it homeless individuals with mental issues, veterans, people with disabilities?
All of the above.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, one of the things, and there's different viewpoints on this, and I'm not even sure all of us are on the same page, to be quite honest, here in this panel. There are efforts to prioritize. You know, certain populations will get priority for housing, whether it's people who are the most vulnerable with multiple disabling conditions, or whether it's someone who's longest on the streets. You know, when you use those approaches, you tend to leave out families, you know? You tend to leave out, and then if you look at people who's longest in the street, you tend to leave out transition-age youth. You tend to leave out people who are fleeing from domestic violence, you know? So efforts to prioritize makes sense. We understand that intuitively because of limited resources, but I think, as Mike said, it's really all of the above. Our organization's philosophy has always been, if you're homeless, you need housing. And if you want it, we should make it available. And if you don't want it, we will convince you why you should need it and then make it available as well. So our organization specifically focuses on people who are homeless with a mental illness, but we don't really believe in the prioritization process. We're subjected to it, and we have to comply with whatever regulations are out there. But ours is very simple. You're homeless because you don't have a home, and to limit who gets access is just it doesn't seem right to us.
I would add families have, I think, the least amount of options in LA currently because they have been sort of not thought of as traditional groups of homelessness. So I think, you know, I agree with everything Dora said. I don't know that we want to prioritize because we then leave someone out and then they become the priority a few years later. But I think that there is a greater realization that many of these systems, I think it was Tommy had said, are just maxed out. So, you know, a few years ago, people transitioning out of foster care, we passed, I think it was Proposition 11, to try to build housing for those people aging out of foster care who have nowhere to go. So the realization that we have this whole cadre of Angelenos who grow up and then have nothing to go into because foster care funds run out, but they're not ready to be on their own. DMH, you know, doesn't have nearly enough. I think it's something like 70,000 patients per clinic right now in LA. Obviously not all getting seen, who many fall through the cracks and end up homeless. So, and efforts again with veterans homelessness, you know, they passed the VASH program, which was to create veteran supportive housing, vouchers that veterans could use, and there's no stock for them to use it with. So I think this is a problem that, you know, even though we're talking about Prop HHH, which is going to focus on the building, but it's many systems all trying to work because they realize that as of right now, they're leading to homelessness, not away from homelessness, and so we need to better coordinate those systems as well.
So I'm going to disagree with Dora a little bit, but not as much as she thinks. And that is, you know, by and large, housing policy has been set at the federal level by HUD. And given that that is inherently driven by political priorities at the time, depending on who's in the White House, different populations will have be prioritized in different time periods. So one of the more recent big ones was veterans. And so every time there's a new priority of folks, what I've seen over time is that it helps change the system and make it slightly more efficient. So there was a big push to get veterans off the street. I think locally, what was it, 2017? Chronically homeless and veterans homeless, was that the target, 2017? 2016. I don't think we're going to make it.
But we're close on that.
But that's just it. So there was a lot of resources put in at both the federal level, and I think there was a response at local level to actually prioritize veteran housing. Now, for us, what that meant is, hey, do the folks that we serve, are they going to get left behind? So these are the high acuity folks that have become the new priority in terms of chronically homeless folks with high acuity needs. I think it speaks to the fact of two things. One is it does leave other people behind. So, and that should never be the case. We are dealing with something that is inadequate to deal with the problem in a comprehensive way. And that's just based on the political choices that we as a society make, whether it's through some federal agency or some local agency. We are making that decision to have too small of a pie to deal with folks who are homeless for a little while or for a long time, or are not very sick or are very sick. And I think it speaks to this issue that, in my opinion, homelessness is it's a little bit like the canaries in the coal mine. It is a manifestation that is very visible, but it speaks to the issue that we don't have enough housing that's affordable for many of our citizens, whether they're seniors and are going to be retiring and trying to live off of Social Security and trying to find an apartment on the Social Security check. Ain't going to happen. We're going to see grandma and grandpa on the 6 o'clock news joining the ranks of homeless people. Whether it's people who are working 2 jobs to afford a place to live, whether it's chronically homeless individuals, whatever the case may be, again, collectively, we have not thought about housing as a basic infrastructure need. We know we need roads and bridges and airports and harbors. Excuse me. We don't think about housing in the same way. And so we have not created enough affordable housing for a lot of people. And so what do folks do, given the median cost? They buy a house in Moreno Valley or, 40, 50 miles away from where they live, or where they work, I should say. And that creates other problems, the congestion and pollution and so forth. So, I think Prop H is it's kind of a narrow sliver of that lack of affordable housing, but it is not the whole problem. And I think we all need to think collectively, how do we actually help create more housing for a bunch of people, even students? You guys are all doing okay, right? Maybe, maybe not. But I think you all understand how hard it is to find housing that you can afford. I think a lot of people are now joining the ranks of, I'm worried about whether I'm going to lose my home. I'm worried about where I can find an apartment that I can afford. And I think that's impacting a significantly larger segment of the population than ever before, given that I actually thought the vacancy rate was 2.7. So it's very tight. And this is up and down the state of California. So we haven't done enough to think about housing as a basic part of what we all need to live. And in some ways, what I see is housing is a basic investment in our own people, whether they be homeless or not.
Let me add the political angle to this. If you don't know anything about the coordinated entry system, look it up, because it's one attempt at prioritizing because of scarce resources, also because of the realities of the world we live in. Dora was hinting at it as something that is more controversial than you'd expect, because it's one way to allocate the pie, and when you start allocating pieces of pie, there are people who don't get the pieces. So look that up, but that's not why I'm here, so I'll talk about political. When we were debating at City Hall what this measure would be, there was an LA City councilman who wanted it to be larger and wanted it to fund a lot more traditional affordable housing. He wanted it to fund up to 80% of AMI, so somebody could be making 45 grand a year or something like that, and be eligible for this subsidized housing. And there were other councilmen who stood up and said, we can't successfully in the political arena get one neighbor to pay a property tax assessment to fund the housing solution for somebody who makes more than they do, maybe. Say that neighbor is a retiree and living on Social Security only and bringing in 24 grand a year. So that's where the political realities hit the road, right? Like, what can we justify politically? What can we successfully sell in a political campaign, especially in the context of Prop 13, where we need 2/3 to approve the measure, right? Getting 2/3 of people to agree on anything is really hard. So the debate became, how much income-based affordable housing are we going to build? One council member wanted it to be much bigger than it was. It ended up being 20% of this pot. This Triple H is not exclusively permanent supportive housing. Up to 20% of it can be used for income-based housing. But that some people had differing opinions about whether or not that would make sense. And because we needed to be able to have a political campaign that linked HHH to chronic homelessness, to what people see and feel on the streets when you're riding the train or riding your bike or walking along or driving along, that's where those worlds sort of came together. And then I'll tell you the dollar amount, 1.2 billion. There were people who wanted it to be 2 billion. There were people who wanted it to be 800 million. A bunch of numbers were thrown out and we ended up at 1.2. It doesn't really align to any, I think, clearly articulated strategy. Now, it should create 10,000 units, which is the gap that's identified in the city's homeless strategies for PSH units needed. It should get to that point, but that was not the driving consideration. So we always have to remember, and you guys are public policy students, that policy only gets us so far, and this is why me as a poli-sci guy and a lawyer want to do the political side, because unless you can sell it politically, unless we can get 2/3 of voters to agree to this thing, the $1 billion doesn't exist at all, and why are we having this conversation?
Thank you for that. So.
It's uplifting. I
No, it's definitely, it's true. Yeah, it's a valid point. So I guess I was trying to look for criticisms of Prop HHH because there aren't that many, but one of them is that the funding can only go towards like land and property, so for the housing, and not towards necessarily other supportive programs for the homeless individuals. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I think because this is the city of Los Angeles is tackling this, and so traditionally, as it relates to services, funding for services in supportive housing or funding for people who are in need of services usually comes from the county, and so it makes sense that the city measure would be focused only on construction. And Mike made a reference to federal resources called home funds. LA used to use that to be their leverage point for tax credits. That was what they would give to developers or loan to the developers for supportive housing construction. And that pot of money has gone down, or it's going down substantially every year. LA used to get about 60 million, then it was like 48, then now they only get about $24 million a year. And so it's insignificant. It's really not making impact. And so the city needed some way of boosting their ability to provide resources for construction. So there's still a lot of effort focused on the county to come up with resources for services. They have various programs through Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services that are already investing in that and are increasing. But there is definitely a conversation at the county about their March ballot, about whether or not they can put another measure on that would essentially match and provide the resources for the housing that's going to be built. And because it takes a while for the money to be rolled out on the construction side, there's certainly time for the county to catch up. And so right now, as we're engaging in Prop HHH campaign conversations and lobbying efforts to get people to vote for it, there's also conversations about what happens in March from the county. And so we believe that there will be a measure on the ballot on the services side. So I understand the criticism from about those that there's no services money, but that's really not the city's purview, and the county, in which jurisdiction if it does belong in, are considering it.
I think the other thing is that the city controls land use decisions in the city, theoretically in the best interest of the city. And so if the city decides it needs more of this kind of housing, that's a city measure. I will say that there has been some activity at the state level with respect to services. So one of the things that is going to roll out, I think in about a little over a year, is something called Health Home. So this is it's part of the Medi-Cal. It's now an entitlement so that typically the folks that we're talking about serving under Prop H services could be directed through the Health Home program if you meet certain criteria for disabling conditions and your homelessness status. The other thing that could provide some services support is something called the 1115 waiver. It's called whole person care, and it will, I think, roll out before the end of the year under the auspices of the LA County Department of Health Services. So it's not that there's no services money at all. Clearly we need more, but I think by the time the housing is built, hopefully some of these other mechanisms will roll out, and we'll see what happens with the county March ballot, whether they actually can get the services proposal off the ground.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, I think there's a few things to consider. So I know we're talking about Prop H, but Prop J, is trying to earmark. So my office, speaking of USC expanding, is actually downtown, and USC is expanding all the way down there. That's right. So on every single block surrounding my office is a new, right? We can't park anymore, right? So every single block is a new building. It's going to be several thousand units, and not one of them is earmarked for low-cost housing. So Prop J, which we're not talking about today, but it's at least the first ballot measure I've seen that's starting to say private developers should also be forced to begin to set aside units for people at whatever percentage of median income that we, the city and the county, deem important. But that's I haven't seen as much momentum around that, probably because Tommy is not in charge of that one. But that's something that in many other major metropolitan areas is a given, that developers have to continuously set aside units for certain income ratios, and we are not doing that in LA. I would also add, again, we've passed a bunch of measures for transitional age youth. The other one that we didn't mention is there's been a bunch of recent props that have passed for people leaving incarceration. And there was supposed to be a lot of money set aside, and we don't know where that money is or who's using it, but we do know there's not that many services. The mayor has stepped forward and created a special office that's going to focus on that. But so thousands of Californians leaving state prison, state jail, and most of them come back to LA, and we don't have anywhere to house them as well. And because of the the Ban the Box campaign, which hasn't passed, meaning you check off, have you ever been arrested or convicted, a lot of them can't find places to rent either, so they're going to end up homeless. So the other question about priorities, they'll probably be a priority in a few years when that's a big portion of the homeless. So there's a lot of policy we can enact that addresses, again, some of these issues. I think one of the criticisms of Prop H is, it's a good measure. I think we all agree with that. But it just shows how inadequate all these other systems have been. The Department of Mental Health has very few outreach teams for what is one of the most spread out large metropolitan areas in the world. So we're not reaching people who need crisis and might avoid housing, because if we could get to them while they're still housed and avoid that whole cycle. And one other, I don't want to go on for too long, but one other issue, back to incarceration, is when you are arrested, you lose all your benefits. That's part of the policy. So the federal government stops giving you, if you qualified for supplemental security income, which is the main means of income for individuals dealing with serious persistent mental illness, that gets taken away. So then when you're discharged from jail, it takes about 3 to 6 months to get that back. So that's guaranteeing every time we arrest someone with a mental illness that they are going to be homeless, because they will have no money upon leaving jail. So that's just a crazy gap in our system of care that we need to legislate and change. Otherwise, we end up with this problem.
All right, thank you. And I think you touched on that partially right now. But since homelessness is being addressed through a coordinated approach, how would Prop HHH work in concert with that? And maybe we could start with you.
Sure. So HHH is a component. HHH is building primarily permanent supportive housing, right? And permanent supportive housing is primarily intended for chronically homeless individuals. And so if we're looking at the city's strategies that it created, that was the result of a kind of 6-month conversation, a partnership between the county and the city of LA. It calls out for an additional 10,000 units to get us to just about 18,000 total units, which theoretically aligns with the chronically homeless population in the city of LA. So theoretically, we build all these units, and that is the supply that we need to have that functional zero concept executed, at least in terms of chronic homelessness. The county measure in the spring is going to be really really interesting. It's going to be a real challenge, I think. It has a much smaller threshold that it needs to pass to be successful, 50%, but there was a reason why the county tried really hard to figure out how to get a revenue measure onto the November ballot, because everybody votes in November. The fall off, the campaign that I ran the last cycle was in the spring, 11% of the registered voters voted. 11%. And you know who votes when it's the 11%? People who don't want to see any additional taxes at all. So yeah, the threshold, because it would be a sales tax bump, 51% is needed on the sales tax. Yeah, that's better than 67%, but it's going to be tough in the spring. And then on top of that, this is countywide. This is the largest county in the country. This is 11 million people. There's a lot of folks who probably aren't feeling homelessness the way we are in the more urban cores. So taxing themselves on a sales tax after we bump it, maybe, hopefully, with Measure M, that's going to be a big lift. You guys can talk more about the strategies. I just wanted to point out those. I'm also, by the way, really optimistic, positive person. I try to be that. That's why I'm working on this measure. But I'm just pointing out the realities that we need to take into account when we're coming up with strategies to get where we need to get.
But are you talking about the campaigns, though, or are you talking more about like the people who are homeless and coordination? Is that? Well, I was just wondering. I was thinking you were going the other direction, and then Tommy answered.
I was trying to link the ballot measures that we're talking about with the strategies that have been created.
Yeah, but I was wondering what the question was. Yeah, well, that's context. That's context, and so Tommy mentioned the coordinated entry system. So that's still intended to be used. So when the housing gets built, there is an effort right now to prioritize, and so the intention is those who have been homeless the longest and with the most vulnerabilities, whether it's health conditions or other type of disabling conditions. When an apartment becomes available, they would be the first folks to get access to them, and so that will help reduce what people will see on the streets. That's what the desire is, but there is a plan in place, and so the good thing in some ways is that there's a system already in place that can implement and move people in as soon as the housing is built.
Okay, great. I think we'll have one more question from us before we open it up to everyone. But we want to ask Tommy about if you can just give us like a brief, update on how the campaign's been going and like whether we're going to make that 67% threshold.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of polling has been done. When a pollster calls up, first of all, you have to get a representative sample, as all of you policy students know. So first you got to get people to answer the phones. And not hang up on you. And then you got to make sure that you're getting the right people to answer the phones and you're getting that mix together. So that's a challenge in LA when most people use cell phones and nobody wants to answer their phones at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. But in the polls that we have done, the first question always, have you heard of this thing? No. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Okay. What do you think about it now? Oh, great idea. I support it. Like between 75 and 85%. All of the polls have shown that people will support HHH between 75 and 85%, which is great. But what's the challenge? That nobody knows about it, right? No, not getting them out to vote because this is a November election, so everybody will already be there. That's why people want to get things on November ballots, because you don't have to worry about getting the butts to the polls. That's not the challenge. You need to make sure that the butts that are going to the polls know about the thing that you want them to know about. So
and they keep going, right?
And they make it to the end of a very long ballot.
If you live in LA, there are 8 pages to your ballot. This is on the last page. It's number 191. That's the yes one, okay? So it's the 191. So how do you get, because the other poll that I heard was of those 85 or so, 46% of them admitted they don't always go to the end of the poll. They don't finish. So how do you make sure they do that? Yeah, that's what we said. So we're doing these postcards, start at the bottom, start at the back, and so that's going to be the challenge. Just keep going.
Yeah. Do you want to know about some of the strategies we're using to try to get there, or you want to? Okay. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but if it's interesting to you guys, I'll talk about it. So there are lots of different tools you can use in a campaign, as you guys know. TV, really expensive, especially in LA, so we're not doing TV. Radio, cheaper, but not very targeted. Can catch a lot of people who aren't going to vote or don't live in the city, so we're probably not going to do radio. So then what does that leave you with? That leaves you with how do you get your message to the people we know are going to vote and get it there as efficiently and cheaply as possible. A lot of direct mail, believe it or not, direct mail still effective strategy. People who read their mail tend to be people who vote. So we're doing a lot of direct mail. That's the majority of the budget that Mike's been working to raise a lot of money for, Dora's been working to raise money for. I've been figuring out how to spend. I'm on the more fun side of that equation, I think. So direct mail, good. We're also doing 100,000 handwritten postcards. Because what's the problem with direct mail? There's a whole subset of people who get this stuff, put it all in one big stack, and throw it into the blue bin. So we're doing this fun thing we're doing 100,000 handwritten postcards. So we address them with a likely voter's address. How many of you have written one of these postcards in this room? Oh, we're gonna fix that. So I have a few more thousand. I'm gonna follow up with you, and I'll give you more free pizza and other incentives, and we'll put together a little event maybe beginning of next week, and try to get people together because we need to finish these cards. When you get something in the mail that has handwriting on it, you're probably likely to look at it a little bit longer. So we're doing those, which is great, and everybody up here has signed up for them and been forcing their employees to write them and asking people to help. We're also using celebrities, because this is LA. There's multiple Facebook videos that are bouncing around right now, paid targeted Facebook ads using celebrities' faces, talking about how important this is. Our one video that's a mashup of 12 celebrities has over 400,000 views so far, which is good. And that's targeted to likely voters using voter databases that we upload into Facebook. And Facebook also has algorithms to identify likely voters. So we're doing all the tricks. We're doing everything we can. But still, fundamentally, in an election like this, people vote based on information from people they trust. So if you haven't put HHH on your Facebook wall or emailed your friends and family saying, here are my recommendations for the ballot in case you wanted to know, or in case you didn't, here they are anyway. I sent my email 2 days ago to 120 people saying this is what's important, because nobody knows what to make of this thing. And when you get overwhelmed, you don't vote. And it happens every time.
The other thing that's happening that you might be interested in, there's a flash mob this coming Saturday in Grand Park, right across from City Hall. I don't know how we get that information to these. Maybe we send it. Yeah, so they're looking for, they actually have a video that has dance steps to it. I don't know about that, but they are looking for a crowd to actually be in the video that somehow will get out there into the ether. So it should be fun. I think I'm going to be. Yeah. We'll do whatever we can to actually make people aware that this is important. It's happening. So this Saturday, I think at 11 o'clock on the west side of City Hall where Grand Park is, flash mob, 11 o'clock.
Be there.
That's right.
All right. I think we should give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.